Howdy, my name is Nonat, and welcome to what's going to be a very different video from my normal content. I'm sure most of you saw this coming, as today we are going to be going over the new ORC license from top to bottom. Apologies in advance if I'm not super jokey or sound a bit less energetic than usual. My goal with this video is to cover the ORC license from top to bottom as objectively and non-biased as possible. It's very easy to go into this saying, these are the people who beat WotC, yay! But that's not what I'm here to do. I want to go over the license, look at it from a casual consumer perspective, and just see what jumps out at me. So a lot of this is basically going to be an ORC license audiobook, with me occasionally interjecting with thoughts and opinions on the way things have been worded and any specific stipulations. Honestly, I'm not a lawyer. I learned a lot back in January, I'm not gonna lie, but I highly doubt a lot of this is going to be incredibly striking, and I might miss occasional things. So, apologies in advance, but I hope you'll stick with me, grab a drink, put me on in the background as we go over the Open RPG Creative License. No plug, no advertisement, except the fact that I'm streaming today at 4 p.m. EDT, so if you're around, I might be live when you're watching this video, so let's jump into it. ORC License. This Open RPG Creative License, ORC license, grants the right to use ORC content subject to the terms and conditions set forth and referenced as follows. Definitions. Product identity means trademarks, trade, dress, and non-functional and creative expressions that are not essential to or can be varied without altering the ideas or methods of operations of a game, including works of visual art, music, and sound design, and clearly expressed and sufficiently delineated characters, character organizations, dialogue, settings, locations, worlds, plots, or storylines, including proper nouns and the adjectives, names, and titles derived from proper nouns. This term, product identity, shall in no event include elements that have been previously designated as ORC content, adapted ORC content that are exclusive property of one or more third parties, or that are in the public domain. Okay, product identity, that's your copyright. That's your original ideas, that's your proper nouns, like it says. Anything that you are creating that is not mechanical, that can be copyrighted, can be considered product identity. ORC content means 1, any material that would otherwise constitute product identity, but that has been expressly identified as ORC content by a licensor, and 2, those expressions of ideas and methods of operation of a game that are comprised of systems, procedures, processes, rules, laws, instructions, heuristics, routines, functional elements, commands, structures, principles, methodologies, operations, devices, and concepts of play, and the limitations, restraints, constraints, allowances, and affordances inherent in gameplay, including expressions describing the function of or providing instructions to the following. Already I can tell this is them saying straight out, anything that is considered mechanical under ORC is automatically non-copyrightable. Now you can offer anything you create as ORC content with that number 1 option. If you make a unique setting known as Fablarian, and you specifically express that Fablarian, the races within, the nations, everything about Fablarian, as a creator, you give the license to be considered ORC content, then when you sign it in, that becomes available ORC content. Note that everything under ORC content will be usable by anybody who signs the ORC content. So, by declaring Fablarian as ORC content, then anyone who signs ORC content can start making content using Fablarian. But anything specifically, I love how detailed that list is: procedures, processes, rules, laws, instructions, heuristics, routines, etc. Basically, anything that falls under gameplay and mechanic is automatically considered ORC content. So, specifically, the following: creation and play of player and non-player characters, including statistics, attributes, stat blocks, traits, classes, jobs, alignments, professions, proficiencies, abilities, spells, skills, actions, reactions, interactions, gestures, resources, and equipment are all automatically considered ORC content. Systems and classifications available to gameplay, including alignments, backgrounds, classes, experience points, levels and leveling up, encounters, combat, initiative and turn order, movement, monster statistics, creature types, traps, conditions, buffs and debuffs, terrain types, challenge ratings, difficulty classes, skill checks, saving throws, resting and resource management, classification of magic systems, spell and ability effects, looting, items and equipment, diplomacy systems, dialogue options, and outcome determination. The dialogue options is a fascinating one. I've never thought of dialogue options as part of a TTRPG, so I'm curious where that would fall in. Everything else makes sense. Leveling, skills, conditions, all that good stuff all makes sense to be counted as mechanical constructs that cannot be copyrighted. Dialogue options, that's fascinating. Methods of determining success, failure, or outcome, and any expressions of such methods or of such successes, failures, or outcomes, and methods and mediums by which players play the game, including dice rolling, random chance, creating or filling in the character sheets, moving and interacting with tokens or figurines, drawing maps and illustrations, speaking, messaging, acting, pantomime, writing notes, asking questions, and making statements. None of that can be claimed ownership of by anybody under the ORC license. And this includes the people who write up the draft. It is specifically stating nobody can ever claim ownership of any of these facets of game design while using this license. No matter who you are, no matter what it is, even if it's a completely unique class and that uses completely unique weaponry, using completely unique spells that you made up yourself, you cannot copyright the fundamental mechanics of those options. You could copyright, say, maybe if the name of the class was the Flablarian Gooblegop, and you call it a proper noun, and you did not give ORC content license to Flablarian and its proper nouns, sure, people can't use the Flablarian Goobleglop, but they could call it something else and still use your mechanics in their product, because it is considered ORC content. For the avoidance of doubt, the term ORC content expressly excludes product identity absent, and to the limited extent expressly designated as such by the licensor in the notice published pursuant to Article 3, which we'll get to. Adapted ORC content means derivative works based on the ORC content that you create to the limited extent that such derivative works would otherwise constitute ORC content. Adapted ORC content expressly excludes works that would constitute product identity. Copyright and similar rights means copyright and or similar rights closely related to copyright, including without limitation performance, broadcast, sound recording, and sui generis database rights without regard to how the rights are labeled or categorized. In no event shall copyright and similar rights include trademark or patent rights. I'm not quite smart enough to know what that means, but if I know, maybe I'm just being naive, but I think that's them defending the ability to create external content like videos, like songs, like podcasts around trademark, but I'm not quite positive. I'm not quite smart enough for that. Effective technological measures means those measures that, in the absence of proper authority, may not be circumvented under laws fulfilling obligations under Article 11 of the thing I'm not smart enough to know about from December 1996. WIPO Copyright Treaty. I'm guessing that's just basic copyright law. Licensed rights mean the rights granted to you subject to the terms and conditions of this ORC license, which are limited to all copyright and similar rights that apply to your use of the ORC content, and that the licensor has authority to license. Sui generis database rights means rights other than copyright resulting from Directive 96/9/EC of the European Parliament and of the Council of 11th of March 1996 on the legal protection of databases as amended and or succeeded, as well as other essentially equivalent rights anywhere in the world. Once again, I'm not smart enough. I'm just relaying information here. Term means the term of the copyright and similar rights licensed herein. Use or used means to use material by any means or process that requires permission under the licensed rights, such as production, reproduction, creation of derivative works, public display, public performance, distribution, dissemination, communication, or importation, and to make material available to the public, including in ways that members of the public may access the material from a place and at a time individually chosen by them. You or your means the individual or entity exercising rights granted under this ORC license. Cool, we have all the terms. I'm sure that was a slog to listen to, but I think here is where things will actually get more interesting and more tangible now that the terms have just been laid out. Grants and limitations. Primary grant to you. Subject to the terms and conditions of this ORC license, for the term licensor hereby grants you a worldwide, royalty-free, non-sub-licensable, non-exclusive, irrevocable license to exercise the licensed rights in the ORC content to use the ORC content in whole or in part. Licensor hereby authorizes you to exercise the licensed rights in all media and formats, whether now known or hereafter created, and to make technical modifications necessary to do so. Licensor hereby waives and or agrees not to assert any right or authority to forbid you from making technical modifications necessary to exercise the licensed rights, including technical modifications necessary to circumvent effective technological measures. That's a big one to me. That is this license saying, even if 20 years down the road, we invent some brand new earth-shattering way to experience TTRPGs, if we unlock the fifth dimension and it's all tabletop role-playing and you access it with a technological apparatus, you can augment and upgrade your ORC content to utilize this new technological advancement, and they can't stop you. Legally, they cannot hold you back from advancing your game effectively. Obviously, this is all super exaggerated, but yeah, if something comes out that's brand new along the lines of VR or something, you are 100% able to use and utilize that new technology to make your game better while still being safe under the ORC license. That's fantastic. Grant of adapted ORC content by you. You hereby receive an offer from the licensor to exercise the licensed rights in the express condition that you do and hereby grant to every recipient of the adapted ORC content an offer to exercise the licensed rights in the adapted ORC content under the terms and conditions hereof pursuant to which such adapted ORC content shall be licensed as ORC content to such recipient. You may not offer or impose any additional or different terms or conditions on or apply any effective technological measures to the ORC content if doing so restricts exercise of the licensed rights by any recipient of the ORC content. I might be reading this wrong, but this might be like saying you have adapted your content to become ORC content. You gave up your rights to Flablarian and made it adapted ORC content. Other people can use it for free. But what you cannot do is sign that, say it's available, and then tell people, yeah, you can use Flablarian if you sign this second contract and give me a $300 stipend. You know, once you have signed the contract and given the content to adapted ORC, you cannot further add stipulations. If you did not sign it away to adapted ORC, sure, you can still sell someone, I guess, the rights to use your product. That's your prerogative. But if you have made the content available, utilizing specifically making it adapted ORC content, you cannot add further stipulations. I like that a lot. Database rights. Where the licensed rights include sui generis database rights that apply to your use of the ORC content, this ORC license grants you the right to extract, reuse, reproduce, and use all of a substantial portion of the contents of the database. And if you include all or a substantial portion of the database contents in a database in which you have sui generis database rights, then the database in which you have sui generis database rights, but not its individual contents, shall constitute adapted ORC content. I'm not smart enough to know what that means. What is sui generis database rights? Okay, so the sui generis database rights is just the right to protection of content you have stored. If you store content somewhere, you have the right to have that content be protected and not be stolen. I can't quite tell what I'm reading here. You might need to let me know in the comments of this one. The database rights here, to me, with my limited understanding of legalese, is reading that if you use all or a substantial portion of ORC content, your content automatically becomes adapted ORC content, meaning it's available to other people. Like if your content is 90% pre-existing content. You use the classes, the ability scores, the saving throws, the character sheets, the equipment, the monsters, and the only thing you change is like the spells. Like, you make Pathfinder 2e in your own way, you make Flubfinder, and you don't change anything but the spells. Are you automatically considered adapted orc content and thus available to the public to use? Let me reread adapted orc content real quick. I might be misunderstanding that. So adapted orc content is specifically derivative works based on the orc content that you are using. So if your new content is majority orc content, you are legally considered derivative. That's what this is. This is stating that legally you are making derivative content because the majority or all of it already existed under orc content. That's really fascinating to me. I'm curious what that means legally. It means you can't steal a bunch of stuff, reflavor it a little bit, and then pretend it's new. If it can be legally proven that the majority of your content already existed under orc license, you cannot legally call it unique and new. I might be misunderstanding that. Again, that one's a little bit complicated, but I think I might have it right. Let me know if I'm wrong. Limitations. Nothing in this orc license constitutes or may be construed as permission to assert or imply that you are or that your use of the orc content is connected with or sponsored, endorsed, or granted official status by the licensor or others designated to receive attribution hereunder. Basically, you can't pretend that just because you're using the license that Paizo gave you a sponsorship or Paizo personally endorsed you, or, Kobold Press for that matter, or Chaosium, or any of the big companies also using this license. Just because you are also using the license does not mean you are affiliated with those other creators. Moral rights, such as the right of integrity, are not licensed under this orc license, nor are publicity, privacy, and or other similar personality rights. However, to the extent possible, the licensor waives and or agrees not to assert any such rights held by the licensor to the limited extent necessary to allow you to exercise the licensed right, but not otherwise. That's a really, really loaded one, and I like that. What that's saying is that the licensors, the creators of this contract, only have legal grounds to shut down your product or force changes to your product if it will not alter the mechanical basis of your product. If you make something incredibly offensive or incredibly morally awful, they can actually reach out to you and say, hey, we can't tell you how to change these dice rolls. We can't tell you how to change this, that, or this other game mechanic. What we can tell you to do is stop making Fatal 2. So they cannot ever take away your licensed rights, but they sure can take away other things if you go against the basic moral code of human decency. To the extent possible, the licensor waives any right to collect royalties from you for the exercise of the licensed rights and use of the orc content, whether directly or through a collecting society under any voluntary or waivable statutory or compulsory licensing scheme. I'm curious what the line "to the extent possible" means. I don't know how this is going to interact with something like Pathfinder Infinite. Because Pathfinder Infinite, they're very public. Paizo gets 50% of the revenue of Pathfinder Infinite sales. So what does this mean? Because again, this is not Paizo. It's important to look at this, that yes, Paizo is the one who wrote this contract, but it is not just Paizo at the top. The licensor, I believe, is going to be whoever technically holds the rights to this contract, which is not going to be Paizo at the end of the day. I don't know what "to the extent possible" means in this right. I like that it reads that, hey, we are not going to ever legally take money from you. Anything you create using this content can be sold for your personal profit. Maybe "to the extent possible" is just to allow things like Drive-Thru RPG, like Pathfinder Infinite, like those content hosting sites to still make kickback from their sales, but I'm not smart enough to know the legal implications of that. That's a little line that could be devious 20 years down the line, or it could be absolutely heroic, and I just don't quite understand it. I like how the rest of it looks. It's just those 4 words that are a little bit weird to me. I'm hoping they're just sort of legalese. Section 3, required notice. The grant of this ORC license to you is expressly conditioned on you including the notice statements described in subsections A through C below in a reasonable manner based on the medium, means, and context in which you used the ORC license. Basically, this is the part you're going to copy and paste in page 1 or the back of your book. ORC notice. The following statement designated the location and terms of this ORC license. This product is licensed under the ORC license located at the Library of Congress at number to be decided and available online at various locations including blah 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 and others. All warranties are disclaimed as set forth therein. Attribution notice. A statement based on reasonable, good faith efforts that identifies each licensor or creator of the ORC content you used and other designated to receive attribution, including all upstream licensors of ORC content upon which your adapted ORC content is based or derived from, in any reasonable manner so requested by such parties for the avoidance of doubt. Both licensor and all parties similarly credited under licensor's attribution notice should be included in your attribution notice unless otherwise reasonably indicated by such parties. That's amazing. So this calls back to the automatic adapted ORC content. You know, if you use 90% of something that already exists, you can. But because you are now legally adapted content, you need to credit everything else you used, whether it be something Paizo wrote, or Kobold Press wrote, or some random creator. If some sole publisher made their own unique system under ORC content, and you stole a huge chunk of their system to the point where you became considered adapted content, you need to credit the folks whose content you adapted legally. And I think that's amazing. The fact that there is a stipulation that automatically legally makes you adapted content if you use enough, and you legally need to provide attribution to the content you have derived. That's amazing. I also like that it's not a copy-paste here. This is like, you can do it yourself. You can write up however you think it needs to look, but you need to provide credit to those whose work you derived. And it's cool that it also gives the ability for someone to say, no, you don't need to credit me. As long as I have given you my consent to not credit me, that's fine. Oh, you just stole some items from my item compendium that were super generic? That's fine. You don't need to credit me. I don't know who's going to say that, but maybe some people will. Maybe some people like to remain anonymous and don't need their name on stuff. That's a cool little subtext. A statement indicating how you wish to be reasonably credited with respect to the adapted ORC content licensed by you under this ORC license, including by pseudonym if designated. Okay, so this goes along with what we were just talking about, where if you make content and you don't want to be credited, you can put your own written consent in your product. In your product's ORC license attribution notice, you can say, if anybody wishes to use this content, they do not need to credit me. This is free to use without credit. Or, if you use this content, please do credit me by the name Flubfinder, period. That's really, really cool. Product identity notice. A statement based on reasonable good faith efforts that identifies the elements of your product identity, if any, contained in the work in which you use the ORC content. For avoidance of doubt, such designation neither limits your rights in your product identity, nor limits any downstream license's use of the adapted ORC content. In the event of a conflict between your designation of product identity and the definition of ORC content, the definition shall control. Interesting. So the first part of this is great. You know, you're going to do something similar to what Wizards did in their old OGL, where you're going to make a big list of the following content is considered product identity and cannot be used. And you leave your big list. You know, you don't put mind flayers in your ORC content, Wizards. But yeah, if you come up with the Flabonian dragon, you can absolutely call that product identity, put that in your list at the end of your book, and people can tell what they legally cannot use. However, remember that the definition of ORC content wins in debates. So if you put rolling flubflex saving throws as product identity, that's not technically correct, because ORC content specifically states that you cannot consider any game mechanic product identity. So if somebody wants to use your flubflex saves, they can do that. If flubflex specifically is some completely unique thing in your world, you can claim that. But you cannot claim rolling that saving throw as product identity, and somebody else could still legally use that because it is just a game mechanic. And then they provide an example of what the attribution will all look like, which I'm not going to go over here. You can pause it and read it if you want. Warranty and limitation of liability, Section 4. Licensor licenses the ORC content as is and as available, and makes no representation of warranties of any kind concerning the ORC content, whether express, implied, statutory, or other. This includes, without limitation, warranties of title, merchantability, fitness for a particular purpose, non-infringement, absence of latent or other defects, accuracy, or the presence of absence of errors, whether or not known or discoverable. Where disclaimers of warranties are not allowed in full or in part, this disclaimer may not apply to you. To the extent possible, in no event will the licensor be liable to you on any legal theory, including, without limitations, negligence, or otherwise for any direct, special, indirect, incidental, consequential, punitive, exemplary, or other losses, costs, or expenses, or damages arising out of this ORC license or use of the ORC content, even if the licensor has been advised of the possibility of such losses, costs, expenses, or damages. Where a limitation of liability is not allowed in full or in part, this limitation may not apply to you. The disclaimer of warranties and limitation of liability provided above shall be interpreted in a manner that, to the extent possible, most closely approximates an absolute disclaimer and waiver of liability. I believe what this is saying is if you get in super serious legal trouble for something you published, I think if you just make a World of Warcraft TTRPG without getting the rights from Blizzard Entertainment, and they come for you and they sue the crap out of you, the owner of the ORC contract license is not liable in any way. So if you get yourself in a heap of legal trouble because of something you wrote for the ORC license, or with the ORC license, the owner of the license is not responsible in any way. Because it specifically says, to the extent possible, in no event will the licensor be liable to you. Other terms and conditions, Section 5, termination and remedies. Your license to use the ORC content will terminate automatically if you fail to comply with the terms and conditions of this ORC license. Your license will be reinstated effective as of the date of termination if you cure such violation on a going forward basis without the obligation to destroy inventory on hand within 60 days of your discovery of the violation, or if licensor waives such violation in writing. That's cool. They're giving you a full-on chance. If you write something absolutely deplorable and the licensor says, hey, change that, and then you change it, you do get the license back. But I also like that it's instant. Literally, whenever they want to, if you break the terms and conditions, they can just take your license away, slap you on the wrist, and say, no, bad, be better. No such termination shall affect, limit, or disrupt the rights of any licensor or downstream licensee of any ORC content under any ORC license. Only the licensor and licensor's upstream licensors under this ORC license, which you are deemed to be in private herewith, may bring enforcement action against you hereunder. This constitutes a limitation on licensor remedies with respect to the license grant in the ORC content hereunder. However, the ORC license neither limits licensors' remedies in any way with respect to licensors' product identity, nor does it limit licensors' rights to offer the ORC content or product identity under separate terms or conditions. That's good. So it gives the licensor a lot more freedom to protect product identity while still maintaining the freedom and flexibility of content, the mechanics, how all the game rules work. That's great. Modifications. This ORC license may not be, I love this part. All right, sit down. This ORC license may not be amended, superseded, modified, updated, repealed, revoked, or deauthorized. Neither you nor licensor may modify the terms of this ORC license. However, you may enter into a separate agreement of your own making, provided such agreement does not seek to modify the terms hereof. This ORC license does not and shall not be interpreted to reduce, limit, restrict, or impose conditions on any use of ORC content that could lawfully be made without permission under this ORC license. To the extent possible, if any provision of this ORC license is deemed unenforceable, it shall be automatically reformed to the minimum extent necessary to make it enforceable. If the provision cannot be reformed, it shall be severed from this ORC license without affecting the enforceability of the remaining terms and conditions. No term or condition of this ORC license will be waived, and no failure to comply consented to unless expressly agreed upon by the licensor. Nothing in this ORC license constitutes or may be interpreted as a limitation upon or waiver of any privileges and immunities that apply to the licensor or you, including from the legal processes of any jurisdiction or authority. Oh boy, that's a lot. Let's focus on the big stuff here, because a lot of that was a lot of legal jargon that definitely goes over my head, but there's a little bit in there that even I can understand. First off, it's not being changed. It is not being amended, superseded, modified, updated, repealed, revoked, or deauthorized. That means a lot. It's also kind of a hilarious dig at the OGL, where they're giving like 7 different synonyms saying it can't be changed. But there is a but here. And it's not super concerning because of the way they worded it. Let's start with, if any provision of the license is deemed unenforceable, it shall be automatically reformed to the minimum extent necessary to make it enforceable. I like this sentence a lot. This is not giving them any freedom to change how something works or completely rework anything. This is giving them the opportunity to add a line of text banning something specifically only if it is something that can be enforced by the ORC license. You know, if it gets to a point where they need to add, the licensee shall not use ORC content for the purpose of defamation of the licenser. They could add that. They could absolutely add that. And then maybe the definition of defamation, but it specifically legally states to the minimum extent necessary. So they can't start adding 1,000 different definitions of what is and isn't defamation to the licensor. They would just have to provide the minimum necessary under this contract. So I love that this contract also limits the licensor, as something like this, which is a good faith contract, should. It limits and controls both sides. What's interesting as well is it says, if this provision cannot be reformed, it shall be severed from the ORC license without affecting anything else. I really don't know where that'll come up. That might be a safety thing. And again, it's very, very coded in legal defenses, which is nice. It basically says, if any part of this contract cannot be legally enforced, if a judge looks at this contract 5 years from now and says, actually, you can't legally do that. You can't legally protect rolling a saving throw, even though you can. They will legally have to sever it, It's basically their way of saying, if we screwed something up here and we cannot enforce something we are claiming to enforce, we will cut it from the contract. And again, that's something that's really good for the licensee, in my opinion. If something cannot be legally controlled by the license, it will be severed. The big thing here, they just got to make sure they get it right. They got to make sure they got 50 different lawyers looking at this thing, gets everybody who knows anything about legalese rewriting it, fact-checking it, everything. Because once this is published, unless something is really screwed up and can't be enforced, or something needs to be very minimally augmented, they cannot change this contract. Ever. It is stuck this way in perpetuity. So, that's it. That's the ORC license. It's only 4 pages. Maybe it'll be longer in the final version, but I'm curious to hear what y'all think in the comments below. Props to you if you managed to get through this insanely long legal speak video. I don't even know how long I've been talking. Looks like it's been about 40 minutes. My God, I'm gonna go edit this and throw it up on YouTube and order pizza. Have a good one, y'all. Talk to you later.